I'm not proud of it, but last summer in Asheville, North Carolina, I told my family no. No to the annual family vacation, no to being the unpaid help, no to the charade that everything was fine. It wasn't some grand, dramatic declaration either. Just a quiet refusal after years of going along with it, years of being the dependable one. I'm 46, by the way, and operations manager for a manufacturing company, though honestly, most days it feels like I'm just managing everyone else's mess. Every summer for the past 6 years, we'd pack up and head to the same rental house near Cape May. A big pastel-painted place where my parents, my sister, and her 3 boys would spend a week playing a happy family while I ran point. Babysitting the nephews while my sister relaxed, handling the food, the logistics, the inevitable conflicts. The first few years, I thought I was being a good uncle, a good son. But then, last year, after they swore up and down that this time it was different, that I'd finally get a real vacation where I could read, nap, have a beer in peace, I ended up stuck with the kids again. They were off on day trips while I was left keeping everyone fed, sunscreened, and entertained. I didn't say much when we got back, just buried the resentment under layers of busy work and polite conversations. But this year, when my sister texted me in March to confirm the house, I hesitated. She assumed I was in. Assumed I'd pay my share, drive the van, and keep her boys from killing each other for a week. I told her I wasn't going. No excuses. Just no. You'd think I'd set fire to the family tree. She called immediately, voice sharp with disbelief, saying they were counting on me, that it wouldn't be the same without me. My parents chimed in too, of course. My dad called it selfish. My mom asked what I'd do alone. They didn't like that I said I'd pay my own way to go somewhere else, just for me. They said it was wasteful, that family was more important. I didn't care. I've been holding it together for years, and I wasn't going to do it again. But here's the twist, what I didn't tell them, and what I'm only now admitting even to myself, is that I'd already booked a solo trip. Not to some fancy resort, but a quiet cabin up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I needed to be away from them, to be in a place where no one knew me as the responsible one, the peacemaker, the guy who sacrificed his own vacation for the sake of everyone else's. I knew this decision was going to leave a scar, but what I didn't expect was how it would crack something open inside me, something that had been building for years, buried under layers of obligation and guilt. When my sister called again the next day, her voice was thick with frustration, like she couldn't understand why I was being so stubborn. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear the unsaid words behind her complaints. How dare I disrupt the plan? How dare I prioritize myself? I let her talk, nodding silently on the other end of the line, until she finally gave up and hung up. The real surprise came later that night, though. My mom showed up at my place unannounced. It was around 9, and I was still finishing up some paperwork for a deadline at work. I heard the knock, and my stomach sank because I just knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. She stood there on my porch, clutching a container of leftover pasta like it was a peace offering. Her face was tight, strained around the edges. I stepped aside to let her in because, well, she's my mom. We sat at my kitchen table, the silence stretching longer than either of us could stand, until she finally said it, that I was breaking her heart, that my refusal to come was selfish and cruel, that I was abandoning the family. I listened, the weight of her words pressing down on me, but there was something else too, something brittle in her voice that made me wonder if she was more afraid than angry. I asked if everything was really okay, and for a second she hesitated. Then she said it. The mortgage on their house was months behind. The family vacation wasn't just a getaway. It was a distraction from bills piling up. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about family guilt or obligation. This was about money, about desperation. My decision to step away wasn't just inconvenient. It threatened the fragile web holding everything together. They needed me not because they loved me, but because I was the one who made things work when they couldn't. I sat there at that table with my mom, feeling a strange mix of pity and anger rising in my chest. It wasn't just the usual family drama anymore. It was a revelation. All those years I thought I was just being a good son, doing what was right, making sure everyone was okay. I was really just a backup plan. Their financial cushion. The thing is, I'd known they weren't great with money. My dad always found ways to spend just a little more than they had. My mom liked her comforts, too. Small indulgences that added up over time. But I never imagined it was this bad. That the family trip was less about memories and more about escaping the reality of overdue bills and final notices. I realized in that moment how much I'd been taken for granted. All those vacations I'd sacrificed to make sure they could relax and play happy family. All the times I stepped in when something broke down or when they needed groceries or gas money. It was never about love or appreciation. It was about survival, and I was the easy option. I asked my mom point blank, why hadn't they told me? Why let it come to this? She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap like she was trying to make herself disappear. She said they didn't want to worry me, that they thought they could handle it, that maybe things would turn around. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't want to admit they needed me because that would mean admitting they weren't in control. They'd rather let me believe I was helping out of the goodness of my heart, not because they'd been quietly sinking for years. That realization stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not because I felt betrayed, though there was plenty of that. It was the deeper, quieter hurt of realizing that my place in this family had always been conditional, not on love, but on usefulness. The next few days passed in a haze. I kept my distance, not answering my sister's texts, letting my mom's calls go to voicemail. I needed time to think, to breathe. At work, I buried myself in deadlines and project meetings. But even then, my thoughts kept circling back to that kitchen table, to my mother's face when she said they just wanted to spare me the burden. The burden they themselves had created. By Friday, I made up my mind. I wasn't going. Not to the family trip. Not to play the role of the dependable son who fixes everything. I was going on my own vacation to that cabin in the Blue Ridge. I booked the rental months ago, under my own name with my own money. A week alone, with no demands, no expectations, no pretending to be the savior. But as I was packing that Friday evening, my sister showed up at my door. I almost didn't open it, but something told me to face her, just once. She stood there, arms crossed, eyes shining with a mix of anger and something that looked an awful lot like hurt. She said the boys were disappointed, that they were looking forward to seeing me, that I was punishing them for something they hadn't done. For a split second, her words almost landed. Almost. But then I remembered all those years of broken promises, of being the default babysitter, of being guilt-tripped into carrying the weight of everyone else's choices. And I knew, clear as day, that I couldn't do it anymore. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was choosing myself for once. I wasn't running away. I was finally standing my ground. She shook her head, muttering something about how I'd regret it, and then she left. I left early Saturday morning. The air in Asheville was heavy with that sticky summer humidity, but it felt lighter to me somehow, like a weight had been lifted. I loaded up my car with a week's worth of supplies, books, hiking gear, a few groceries, and started the drive up into the Blue Ridge. The cabin was just as I imagined it. Small, secluded, with a wraparound porch that overlooked a tangle of trees and mist-covered hills. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just quiet. As I unpacked, I felt the tension begin to leave my shoulders, replaced by something that felt dangerously close to peace. For the first 2 days, I did nothing but rest. I napped on the porch, read through half a novel, and let the silence settle over me like a soft blanket. I thought about the family, about how they'd react when they realized I wasn't coming back to fix things this time. I wondered if they'd finally understand that I wasn't a permanent fixture in their lives, that I had limits. But then on the third day, I got a surprise I didn't expect. I'd gone for a long hike along one of the mountain trails, and when I returned, there was a car parked by the cabin. My heart sank, immediately fearing the worst. And there they were, my parents, sitting in their car, like they'd been waiting for me. My dad stepped out first, looking sheepish, while my mom sat rigid in the passenger seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. I stood there on the gravel path, my hiking boots still dusty, feeling a familiar surge of dread and obligation claw at my chest. But this time, I didn't move to greet them. I didn't invite them in. I just waited. My dad cleared his throat and said they just wanted to talk. He said they'd driven up as a last-ditch effort to make me see reason, to convince me to come back with them. My mom finally got out of the car, her movements stiff, like every step was a fight with herself. She said they were sorry, that they hadn't meant to hurt me, that they needed me. But the words felt rehearsed, like she was reciting a script she'd practiced all the way up the mountain. I stood there, my hands in my pockets, listening as they tried to make it sound like this was about family, about love. But I couldn't unhear what my mom had let slip at my kitchen table back home. The overdue mortgage, the piling bills, the desperate hope that I just keep being the safety net. It wasn't about family, it was about survival. I told them I wasn't coming back. Not this time. Not to fix things, not to keep pretending everything was fine. I said I loved them, but I was tired of being used. My mom's face crumpled, and for a second, I almost faltered, but I caught myself. My dad said I was being unfair, that I was punishing them. I shook my head. No, I said, this was me finally being fair to myself. They left not long after that. My mom was in tears, my dad silent except for a muttered goodbye. I stood on the porch, watching their car wind down the gravel road, the dust rising behind them like a ghost of everything I was leaving behind. For the first time in years, I felt something almost like freedom. It wasn't complete, not by a long shot, but it was the first step away from the weight I'd carried for too long. I sat on that porch until the sun dipped below the hills, and in the quiet that followed, I realized how much of my life I'd lived for other people. The resentment, the quiet sacrifices, the endless stream of yes when I should have said no. It all felt so clear now. I thought of my nephews, how much I loved them, but also how much I'd been taken advantage of. How my sister would guilt me, how my parents would lean on me because I made it easy. It wasn't easy anymore. It wasn't going to be. I spent the rest of that week in silence. Hiking, reading, letting myself feel whatever emotions bubbled up, regret, relief, even a flicker of hope. On the last morning of the cabin, I stood outside, coffee in hand, and let the mountain air wash over me. The silence felt almost sacred, a space where I could finally hear my own thoughts without the constant hum of family voices telling me who I was supposed to be. I wasn't under any illusions. Going back would be messy. My sister would likely ice me out for a while. My parents would make their disappointment known in quiet, sharp ways, and the nephews might not understand why Uncle Jake wasn't around like before. But for once, I wasn't letting that dictate my choices. I'd spent so much of my life folding myself into the spaces they left me, trying to make things easier for everyone else. Now, standing there with my packed bags in the trunk and the sun just starting to rise over the ridge, I realized I wasn't sorry. I wasn't sorry for choosing myself this time. I wasn't sorry for leaving behind their expectations. I wasn't even sorry for whatever fallout might come. They'd had years to learn who I was, but I was only now starting to figure it out for myself. As I slid into the driver's seat and pulled onto the dirt road, I felt something unfamiliar in my chest. Not peace exactly, but something close. The drive back to Asheville was long and quiet, but it didn't feel heavy the way I thought it might. I'd imagined feeling regret, dread even, but instead I just felt empty, not numb, just cleared out like I'd finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to begin with. I didn't turn on the radio. I let the hum of the tires on the road fill the silence, the sun climbing higher as the miles ticked by. With every turn, I felt the weight of my family's expectations fall away, little by little, like a snake shedding its skin. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't clean, but it was necessary. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at my own front door. My home, small, cluttered, and undeniably mine. It struck me then how much I'd let my family's needs creep into this space too. The spare room stacked with toys for the nephews, the calendar crowded with family obligations, the freezer full of meals I'd made for them just in case. It wasn't just the vacations. I'd been living my entire life in service to other people's needs. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet felt heavier here, but also familiar, like slipping into an old, worn jacket. I set my bag down and sat on the couch, the weight of everything crashing into me all at once. Not just the last few days, but the years of giving too much of being the good son, the good brother, the responsible one. I let the emotions come, anger, sadness, guilt, even relief. I let myself feel them fully, without trying to fix or justify them. By evening, I realized I needed to call them. Not because I wanted it, not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to close the loop. I called my sister first. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight and cold. And for a moment, I almost apologized. Almost. But I caught myself. Instead, I told her I was home, that I wasn't coming to the family vacation, that I hoped she'd understand, but I knew she probably wouldn't. She said something sharp about how I was abandoning them, how selfish I was. I listened, then told her I'd be here if she ever needed to talk, but that I wouldn't be the family's crutch anymore. She hung up. Next, I called my parents. My dad answered, his voice cautious, my mom hovering in the background. I told them the same thing, that I loved them, but I needed space, that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for a family that only noticed me when they needed something. My mom cried. My dad tried to reason with me, but I stayed firm. I told them I wasn't angry, just done. After I hung up, I sat there in the dark, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. The days that followed were quiet. The text from my sister slowed and then stopped altogether. My parents didn't call again. Though I saw my mom's number flash on my phone a few times, I didn't answer. It was as if the whole family had retreated into silence, waiting for me to make the next move. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch between us, a boundary I was no longer willing to cross. I spent my days at work, focusing on projects and tasks that, for once, felt mine alone. I went home in the evenings to a house that felt both empty and liberating. I cooked meals just for myself, left dishes in the sink, stayed up late watching old movies without worrying about anyone's schedule but my own. One evening, about a week later, I sat at my kitchen table scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of family trips, of birthdays, of my nephews grinning up at me with sticky hands for melted ice cream. There was a sharp ache in my chest as I remembered those moments. Not just the sweetness of them, but the bitterness too. The feeling of being there but not seen. Of being useful but not valued. I realized then that this wasn't about a single vacation or a few missed calls. It was about a lifetime of bending, of giving in, of choosing others over myself until I didn't even recognize who I was outside of their expectations. And it wasn't just them. It was me too. I let it happen. I made it easy. I closed the photo gallery and set the phone down. The ache didn't vanish, but it settled into something more manageable, something I could carry. I wasn't going to erase those memories. They were part of my story, part of how I'd learned to be who I was. But I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. The absence of their calls and texts, the quiet that once felt heavy, now felt like space I could finally fill with something of my own. I started picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned years ago, woodworking in the garage, weekend hikes without an itinerary, even learning to cook meals that didn't revolve around convenience. One Saturday, I ran into a neighbor I'd barely spoken to in years. She asked if everything was all right, said she hadn't seen me with the kids lately. I just smiled and said I was focusing on myself for a while. She nodded, maybe a little surprised, but didn't press. I realized then how much of my identity had been tied to being the dependable one, the helper, the one who said yes. Without that, I was learning to be someone else. Someone who knew when to say no, when to step back, when to choose peace over obligation. It wasn't easy. I still had moments of doubt, of guilt, of wondering if I was being too harsh. But then I'd remember the years of silent resentment, of missed chances, of sacrificed rest. I'd remember standing on that cabin porch, watching my parents drive away. The truth is, I wasn't just reclaiming my vacation. I was reclaiming my life. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how the family reacted, I'd never be the same person they used to rely on. That night, as I sat in my living room with a book in hand and the quiet hum of the world outside, I realized something. The silence wasn't empty. It was finally mine.